Welcome to the exciting episode number 70 of the World Builders Anvil. As always, I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and today's topic, it takes two, or maybe more. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back, and getting back to the lines of what we were talking about on Monday. Today we're going to be talking about factions. And factions are this interesting way to look at the world beyond state, beyond culture. It's the way that people connect with each other. And the few ways I like to look at factions. One, a group of states. That's an alliance. Think NATO, think the Warsaw Pact, think any alliance between nations. This is a way for nations to stand up against bigger foes or to help protect the interest of those states. Individual states are another faction. What is the relationship between Germany and France throughout time? They were two factions that played against each other. So that's usually a basic level where people think about factions, state versus state. But then within states, there are intrastate factions. Intrastate factions are groups of people within a state that group together or ally with each other for their common good. Examples of this in fantasy are your thieves guilds, your mage guilds, perhaps adventuring guilds, guilds of artisans. Maybe the farmers come together in a collective. Anytime you have a grouping of people within. And another possible way is if you have a state with multiple cultural groups, the cultural groups themselves might have their own factions. It's a way for a dynamic within a state to happen. And then more commonly, you think of political factions in states. This goes back to Federalist Paper 10 and Madison worrying about factions a bit, even though he belonged to one. He belonged to the Republican Democrat Party, I believe. But when you look at factions, political factions, it's a grouping of people who have common political goals. An elected state that's a little bit different than in, say, medieval England, where you had factions of Protestants and Catholics vying back and forth for control of the country. You might also have religious factions along those lines. They might extend to political or just be more like in the modern U.S., where you have Christians and atheists, and even though they would consider themselves a religious faction. Internally within religions, there might be factions. They're called synods in the Protestant faith, breaking Christian into parts that way. You have Orthodoxy Catholic, you have Catholic, you have, I think, Mystic, which is probably horribly mispronounced. But you have all of these different internal factions, and their way to sort of bring together a structure within your society. And those structures can be used for intrigue and stories. They can be used for physical violence to each other. Maybe it's a battle between street gangs. That would be two opposing factions within a city. Maybe between organized crime and a group of street gangs. That would be another faction battle. They don't necessarily have to be violent. Faction hostility does not have to lead to violence. That just means they have different goals. Sometimes they might work together. Sometimes they might work apart. There might or might not be violence. Now, the less developed the societies are, the less developed people's sense of humanity is, I would imagine the more likely there would be to be violence. Look at the different patrician houses in the republics in Italy during the Middle Ages. Lots and lots of violence in between. So there can be violence. It might not be open up in a frontal war against each other. It could be hidden behind the scenes, assassinations, kidnappings, that sort of thing. However, ultimately, the way factions interact in stories are, at the most basic level, society happening around the characters in the story. It might be directly related to the story. Characters might spend part of their time caught up in intrigue, which is distracting them from the story. These are all things for you to consider. Now, the most basic level of faction, which I don't have listed, is person to person, much like state to state. People consider this, I like Bob. Bob likes me. We don't like Billy. So we team up together to try and stop or hinder Billy's a chance to advance himself. Now, what are common causes of faction? But back a second. Now, you'll have sometimes big things happening which from some perspectives might not contain violence but really do. Like Cold Wars. The Cold War on Earth was between the US and the Soviet Union, and it was battled between two massive superpowers. And the story is that the reason it's a Cold War was because it never heated up into an actual war. And that was true. The US and the Soviet Union never fought each other, but there were many, many proxy wars fought throughout the time. There's possibly spy intrigue happening as well, where people are getting killed at that level and at this spy level. So just because something's considered non-violent, because the two massive states don't come together in war, does not mean that there is not violence. And many of the people who get caught up in the violence will consider it a violent conflict. Now, what are the causes of factions? And this is by no means meant to be an exhaustive list, but just a list of a few things to keep in mind. One, they have a common cause. For example, you probably had various factions that bonded together in the Revolutionary War, which helped lead to the independence of the United States from England. They probably did not all exactly believe the same things. It's very doubtful they did. It's very doubtful that what they believed was even common, but they had a common cause of freedom versus England. Now, whether that was to avoid taxes, whether that was for freedom, whether that was to just propagate their own base of power, is completely irrelevant. They had a common cause. Common culture. You'll see this a lot, in sort of ethnic neighborhoods in the United States. I think a lot of those are starting to fade now, and they're starting to blend in, and maybe different kinds of cultural neighborhoods. And you definitely do still have cultural neighborhoods, or you'd have like Polish groups or Lithuanian groups, Italian groups. All of these different groups would sort of come together around their own culture, help give scholarships to each other. This would be a common cultural connection. Common enemies, for example, let's say you have a war going on versus ISIS. We'll just make up something. ISIS has a coalition of people that they've brought together against their common enemies, which are the United States, Iraq, Syria, every nation they want to conquer. Conversely, a lot of these nations have a common interest against ISIS. So on both ends of that, you have a common enemies reason for fighting. And that could be caused by religion. That could be caused by political stake or power. Once again, it's not important why they have a common enemy, but they do. Convenience. That is the most basic one. It's just friendship or an allyship due to convenience. Maybe you both work at the same company, you and a friend, so you work together and help each other move up because he wants to become the CTO and you want to become the CFO. You don't have a common cause nor a common enemy, but due to necessity and convenience, you come together to work together. Now, this is an intermediate rating. It takes a little bit of thought about this. Where culturally are people going to come together or pull apart, or between states, the same thing? It's something worth spending time on, because if you know some of these groups, some of these factions, you don't need to know them all, but at least the major players in the area that your stories are taking place in, that'll easily give you things to pull in detail into stories without having to do a lot of work. Let's say you have a big problem, with worker rights, and you want to do a story about worker rights. So you have a couple different competing factions built up along the way of how to best protect the worker. There's conflict back and forth. Maybe they come together to fight against the people who control the workers, or perhaps, and then once that happens, then they compete for control of the workers themselves. The world building task for the day. Create a faction listing for a state in your fantasy world. What alliances do they have? What states do they like or dislike? What are some possible alliances against and for them? What are the internal factions within that society that might be used by external forces or each other to try and extend their own power within the state? The real world task for the day. Now, I have to thank the University of Michigan, which, since I lived in Columbus, Ohio, is a hard thing to do. But I want to thank them. I found this great article. And over the next several episodes, I'm going to give real world tasks of the day for how to improve your creative thinking. And this one is keep track of your ideas at all times. And the point of this is Essentially, you have 24 hours to write down an idea before it's forgotten forever. So if you have an idea, record it. If you have a phone with a recorder, send a text to yourself, put a note on your phone. I'm very fond of writing on the backs of used pieces of paper, folding them up, shoving them in my back pocket, hopefully not using them. But when you're thinking about ideas and something comes up, you need to write it down as quickly as possible, or you will forget it forever. Or you will forget the crux of it. And that will basically hurt you in your ability to grow in your thinking. It's sort of an exercise to help you remember the bright ideas you have and sort of train your mind at the same time to record them so at some point you can take advantage of them. Now the tease for the next episode. This Friday is Discworld and the Brilliance of Terry Pratchett. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under Podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.